A silent reminder of storms and failure, the large black hulk of a ship drifted alone through the Arctic. Ice surrounded her, her only friend. She was spotted numerous times over the course of 40 years, a haunting ghost that plagued the Alaskan coastline. Strangely, she hasn't been seen in almost 60 years, a true ghost and mystery of the ages. Welcome to Shipwreck Sunday, my name is Eleanor. Just a quick disclaimer for our younger audience before we dive in. This story may be disturbing to some, so viewer discretion is advised. Okay everyone, let's get into it. Happy Halloween for those celebrating this year. I love the spooky season, and I'm so excited to do another ghost ship episode. Today on Hallows Eve, we will get into the story of the Baychimo. Baychimo would start her life as SS Ångermanälven, named after the Ångermanälven River in Sweden. Ångermanälven was built by the Swedish shipbuilders Lindholmens Mekaniska Verkstad AB in Gothenburg, Sweden, also called the Lindholms Shipyard for short. She was laid down sometime either before or in 1914 as yard number 420. Lindholmens built the ship for the German company Baltische Reederei GmbH, based out of Hamburg, Germany. She'd be launched sometime in 1914, but the exact date is unknown. Before we get any further into her story, let's look at her specs. Ångermanälven was a steel-hulled cargo ship with her tonnage sitting right at 1,322 metric tons. As for length, she was 70.1 meters or 230 feet long. We unfortunately really don't know much else about her, other than the fact that she was powered by a triple expansion steam engine, giving her an average service speed of 10 knots. We do know she had a robust, reinforced bow capable of plowing through the ice-laden seas around northern European ports. She was a black-hulled beauty with a white superstructure and one skinny, bright yellow funnel. Okay, now we can continue with her early history. Spoiler alert, we know very little about her early career, and her time as a German ship was short. She was built in 1914, right in the first year of World War I. Due to her tough, ice-breaking bow, she worked year-round, servicing the Baltic Sea ports through to the end of World War I. At the end of World War I, on November 11, 1918, Germany signed the conflict-ending Treaty of Versailles, and in it, it states that, quote, Germany recognizes the right of the Allied and associated powers to the replacement, ton for ton and class for class, of all merchant ships and fishing boats lost and damaged owing to the war. In ancient times, one might call this the spoils of war. And so Ångermanälven was paid to the United Kingdom as war reparations. The UK sold her off into the private sector, with Hudson's Bay Company purchasing her for just £15,000 for her in 1921, which was much less than the cost of a brand new steamship. Since she was so strong against ice, she was perfect to visit the icy waters where HBC fur traders operated in Canada. Baychimo operated out of Ardrossan, Scotland, and traded between here and the north coast of Canada, hitting up trading posts and collecting pelts. She spent numerous seasons around Quebec and Siberia, then being reassigned in 1924 to the western Arctic of Canada, usually going between Vancouver, British Columbia, and the Canadian Yukon and Northwest Territories. She was a lumbering, unassuming cargo ship that traveled slower than most of the steamers that plied the Inside Passage, with rust soon covering the hull. A crew member described her saying, quote, She was a strange and disappointing craft. I looked desperately for some redeeming feature. She bore no resemblance to the traditional bark-rigged steam whalers. She hardly differed from 100 other coasting tramps. She was iron and steam, all bulk, not designed to fly with canvas. She was no beauty. Ouch. All ships in the Arctic faced the same constant threat, ice. It would creak, groan, and scrape past the hull, which was disconcerting. In 1924, the schooner Lady Kindersley, another HBC vessel, was trapped off Point Barrow in an ice pack that slowly drifted north. The crew ended up having to abandon their ship, much to the chagrin of HBC, and the colorful side of newspapers described the loss of $1 million load of furs just floating away into the Arctic. SS Baychimo and her crew were successful, despite the fact that every trip was challenging and the farthest from routine as humanly possible. Conditions changed rapidly, and the ship and her crew narrowly escaped in 1925 when they cut a path through cliffs of ice taller than the ship's deck. The ship's master from 1922 to 1931, Captain Sidney Cornwell, wrote in 1930, quote, On several occasions, I have only got the ship out by a margin of a few hours. For her captain and crew, life aboard SS Baychimo was either dull or extremely exciting, since conditions changed so quickly. The ship was practically a floating warehouse and was just as fun as that sounds. The crew were also rarely given on-shore time unless it was for official business. The rules stated as follows, quote, "No members of the crew be allowed to remain on shore unless it is absolutely necessary." Then in 1931, disaster would strike, leaving the crew stranded. Though don't worry, we'll never leave you stranded. If you're enjoying this video, leave me a like, subscribe to the channel for more content, and let me know down in the comments section below. This episode couldn't be possible without our amazing YouTube members and patrons. Thank you all so much. If you'd like to have some awesome perks like episodes a full day in advance, join our YouTube memberships today. Alright folks, let's get into the spookiness. During 1931, the ship had run into difficult patches of ice. On October 1st, 1931, SS Baychimo was at the end of a trading run and loaded to the brim with furs when she's become ensnared in pack ice. Briefly, the crew abandoned ship, traveling over a half-mile of ice to the nearby town of Barrow to take shelter for a couple of days. However, during this time, Baychimo had broken free, becoming stuck again on October 8th, though much worse this time. On October 15th, HBC sent aircraft in to rescue 22 of the crew, leaving 15 behind. These 15 were going to stay with the ship and wait out the winter if need be, constructing a wooden shelter just a ways away. On November 24th, 1931, a powerful blizzard ripped through the area, and after the snow settled, Baychimo was gone. Her crew and captain were flabbergasted. Captain Cornwell concluded that she must have foundered, though a few days later, an Inuit seal hunter informed them he'd seen her about 45 miles away from their position. The 15 men then moved on to track the ship down, and they did find her. However, she was worn and beaten up as ever, and they decided she was unlikely to survive the winter, electing to retrieve the most valuable furs from the holds and to transport by air. She was then abandoned. However, Baychimo had been built to last, and she did not sink. Over the next several decades, there were numerous sightings of this incredible ghost ship, a lone hulk drifting the ocean. People have tried to board her multiple times, however, each time they were either unequipped to salvage her or driven off by bad weather. Like a stallion, Baychimo bucks off unwanted visitors from her back. The last recorded sighting of her was by a group of Inuit in 1969, 38 years after her abandonment. She was stuck in the pack ice of the Beaufort Sea between Point Barrow and Icy Cape in the Chukchi Sea off the northwestern Alaskan coast. Ultimately, Baychimo's fate is unknown, and it's believed that she's sunk by now, though there's always the chance that she stands proud, still drifting to this day. Now, we are going to look at the numerous documented sightings of her, and this is where we get particularly ghostly and spooky. As we covered earlier, the first sighting of her was by an Inuit man who spotted her 45 nautical miles south from where she was left, again ice-packed. Several months later in 1931, she was spotted again about 300 miles to the east, drifting. The following year, in January of 1932, she was spotted floating peacefully near the shore by a man traveling to Nome with his dog sled team, and his name was Leslie Melvin. A few months after Mr. Melvin's sighting, a company of prospectors spotted her, again peacefully adrift. In March of 1933, she was spotted by a group of Inupiat who boarded her and were trapped on the ship for 10 long, scary days by a freak storm. On August 11, 1933, Baychimo was spotted just 12 miles off the settlement of Wainwright, Alaska. Local inhabitants of Wainwright, the crew of MS Trader, and their lone passenger, author, and botanist, Isabel Wiley Hutchinson, boarded the ship. They recovered a whaleboat, some furniture, and several other items. Sometime in August of 1933, HBC overheard she was still afloat. However, she was too far at sea to salvage her. In July of 1934, she was boarded by a group of explorers from a schooner. In September of 1935, she was again spotted off the coast of Alaska, drifting alone. 4 years later, in November of 1939, she was boarded by Captain Hugh Poulsen in an attempt to save her, but the lurking ice floes created a very dangerous situation that Poulsen was forced to escape from. She'd been spotted numerous times between 1939 and 1962, but much like a wild Mustang, she evaded capture. In March of 1962, Baychimo was miraculously still floating and spotted drifting along the Beaufort Sea coast by a group of Inuit. She was spotted in 1969 for the last official reported sighting 38 years later. She was frozen in an ice pack, spotted by a group of Inuit. I can only imagine what she looked like. Caked in ice, snow, and rust, with her rigging ragged from the wind and storms over the years. Her black hull would have been dulled with rust, chipping paint, and dents from ice. Her white superstructure adorned with drips of scarlet rust and hunks of metal showing beneath the peeling paint. Her windows might have been blown in, leaving shards of glass about the deck. The leftover furs in her cargo hull would sit, frozen and covered in a thick layer of dust, remaining where they were left by her crew almost 40 years earlier. Of course, the ice pack and ensnared Baychimo would move on, disappearing once more. Since then, there has been no more reported sightings of her. It isn't impossible that she's been seen since, however, it is also possible she has sunk in this amount of time. Should she still be drifting somehow, the over 100-year-old ship will have been drifting for close to a century, solitary this whole time. In 2006, the Alaskan government began to work on a project to solve the mystery of the ghost ship of the Arctic, looking to locate Baychimo, whether she remains afloat or sunk. However, she's yet to have been found, still avoiding capture to this day. Baychimo began her career as a homely cargo ship, though successful as she was ugly. In her own way, her beauty would shine more as an abandoned ghost ship, drifting quietly through the sea and possibly to this day still. One day I hope she is discovered, whether she is afloat or sunk. If you liked that story and wanted to hear something similar, check out our cargo ships playlist in the cards. Tune in this Sunday for the story of Jan Hveluc, a Polish ferry that sank in the Baltic Sea. Thank you for tuning into this special Halloween edition of Shipwreck Sunday. Have a safe and spooky Halloween, and we'll see you next time.